topic I'm covering today is skinning our VCL applications. And skinning, if you're not familiar with the terminology, is to change the look of an application, give it different coloring, different imaging, without having to change our code. And so what I'm going to show is how do we actually do that in our applications. Talk about creating custom styles, which is how the skinning works. It's done through a concept of VCL styles, which is different than the FireMonkey styles. They're similar, but we'll see when we talk about how we build the VCL styles and just why they're different. They're specifically designed for the VCL. We've got, and at the last part of the session, I'll talk about supporting VCL styles in any custom controls that you may have created, or probably more prevalent is when the VCL styles doesn't work, why might it not be? And that way you can go and talk to the vendor that you're using and seeing why it's not getting the full support. So to start, I'm just going to do a quick example and show you what the VCL styles is all about. And I'm going to go over to Delphi here. And what I have shown is really just a simple application using the standard controls that come with Delphi. I've got group boxes, check boxes, and so forth, lists, tree views, and so. Regular VCL app, there's no code behind it, it's just presenting data. In order to invoke the VCL styles, we have to go to the program options and the new appearance page. And we'll see that there's a list of a whole bunch of styles that are available for us to pick. And it seems that with each new version of a release, whether it's an update and so forth, more styles get added into the mix here. And the way it works is you always get the Windows style. And the Windows style is the equivalent to the theme support that was started with Windows XP. Before that, your controls took on the look and feel from the Control 3D library. User 3D, everything, User 32, that's where those controls resided. Then they went into the common controls, then the common controls got themed, which meant that you could pick between the blue, the green, and the silver, so they would change a little bit. The way Windows does its theming, including in Windows Vista and in 7, is that they establish bitmap images for the different elements that make up the control. So they've designed a bitmap image for the button, for example. Now, you can create a button any size. You can make a really big one, a really small one, and it looks appropriate. And the reason for that is they don't just do a straight scaling to take a small bitmap image and to make it large. They do a 9-segmented scaling. So you scale the corners, the edges, and then the interior is what fills up. So you get this good look. Well, the reason I bring all that up is that the VCL styles support in Delphi is modeled after that same approach. It actually uses the same coding engine inside of the VCL to do the theming for Windows themes as it does for the VCL styles. So you always get Windows. We also can pick whichever ones we want to pull here. These Metropolis ones are new for XE3. You may notice these fixed versions. Those are my fixed versions because there's some problems with the ones that come out of the box. And Barcadero's aware of that. Hopefully they'll get them fixed in the next one. But actually it's a good point because I'll show exactly why I needed to fix those. But let's pick another couple of obvious ones. The aqua graphite's a nice one to pick. So I can select it, I can click a preview, and it gives me a general idea of what that theme or style should look like. If I pick another one, Cobalt Media, what's that one look like? Okay, they're kind of dark as well. Golden Iceberg Classico, what is it? Oh, that's kind of pretty. So we'll go ahead and select that. So I'll pick the two of those, but which one I want to start with the aqua graphite. Go ahead and click OK, run my app. And it now has the aqua graphite look. It's all the same controls that we're used to using, but instead of picking up the theming from Windows, it's actually picking up the styling from this resource that we specified. So those styles, the aqua graphite, for example, comes into our executable as a resource. And so rather than going out to the Windows library, which has the default styles, we pick the ones from here. And so all the capabilities are in there, the drop downs and so forth, list boxes. I'll talk about what things aren't there in just a minute. Let me go ahead and close that. So that's really what it's about. If I wanted to change that, go back into the program options, change the default to be the iceberg, go ahead and click run. Same app, we get a different look and feel. Or it's not a different feel, it's just a different look. But all the hot tracking and capabilities are in there. All right, let me close that, see if I wanted to highlight any more information on the slides. So at this point, if we wanted to just pick one style and use that, that's all we would really need to do. What's kind of fun, though, is to be able to dynamically change the style that we're using. Maybe you want to pick 2 or 3 of them and give the user a choice. Which one would you like to use? Maybe they want the dark style, maybe they're more traditional, and they want a light background UI. So in order to do that, we need to use the T-Style Manager, which used to be the Theme Manager. Now they've created an alias for it called the Style Manager. It's in the VCL Themes unit. And there's some properties and methods that we can use. So there's a Style Names class, which gives us a list of all the styles that have been linked into the application. And it uses a generic array. So we're going to use that to access the T-string array. And then once we decide which VCL style we want to use, we can simply call the setStyle method to apply that to the form. So let's take a look at what this is about. And I've kind of set the stage for this already. I've got this select style combo box here, and I'm going to go to the constructor first to see exactly what I need to do to set this up. The init controls is simply setting up the tree to be expanded and other things. We're going to ignore those for now. It populates the list boxes. What's interesting is the iteration over the style names property inside the style manager. So for style name in, the style names do, and I'm just simply adding the style names to the combo box. Straightforward code here. I'm setting the initial index into that combo box to be the default, which is the active style name. So if you wanted to find out so no matter which one we pick, that's what's going to start at. Then the other change is when I make a change in the combo box, on change event fires, I need to populate or change the style by calling setStyle. Pretty straightforward. Go ahead and run this version of it. Now you will see this is why the Iceberg Classico showed up into this combo box. If I go and change it to Aqua Graphite, it fades out the window, fades it back. It's essentially recreated the window by changing out what resource is used to define all the appearance of the different controls. Likewise, I can go and change this to the Windows version, and it looks like the Windows 7 version of those same controls. Any questions on any of that? It's pretty straightforward. It's kind of fun. It was kind of cool because it's something that people have been kind of wanting to be able to do for a long time. And you could do it in certain things at a control level, but now it encompasses all the controls. So you can really change a dramatic look and feel of your app. So some additional notes on all of this. Actually, I should try this. I'll go through these and I'll explain them. The top level menus are styled. So the menu bar at the top. The menu itself, if I go ahead and run this, it's more clear when I do a dark one. They are not. So they still have the original Windows look. There's a way to work around that. Well, it's a way to work around that by working with a third-party company that I just happen to know a lot about. So I don't get, that's not a workaround of free thing, but there is a way to get around that to support it. I don't want to mislead you guys. Drop-down menus and pop-up menus are not, they don't pick up the VCL styles at this point. The other thing to watch out for is when I get to the component support section, I'll explain why these things can happen, but not every aspect of every control may pick up the style correctly. As an example, let's go, when we look at the tool, the buttons by default are slammed right up at the top of the toolbar, and I haven't changed any of the sizing or anything that's the defaults. And so one of the things when I would use the standard controls is I would change the border property of the toolbar. And so if I find the border width property and easily change that to say 2, it shifts everything down and it looked better. It was nice and positioned. Needless to say, when I ran the app and switched to my, well, you can even see it there, but it's really noticeable in the aqua graphite. I got this big 2-pixel rectangle all around my toolbar. Ugh, yuck is right. So you may run into that. In the VCL controls, there's a couple, there's not many. This is just one that I ran into. There's a couple others that you can see. You may run into this also with third-party controls that you're using. If you do the theme and all of a sudden something shows up in a completely odd color, either all white or all black, or you don't see the, you've lost the text, and so there's some extra steps that they're going to need to do in order to support VCL styles more appropriately. And I'll give you the guidelines of all of those a little bit later. All right, switching back, all forms use the same style. So you are adding it at the application level. Not that you probably would want to switch them, but it has come up in previous sessions where I've done this. People say, hey, can I have one style? I want aqua graphite for my main window, but I want aqua gold or golden graphite for the child windows that pop up, dialogues. Interesting. I wouldn't do that, but you can't do it if you wanted to, so everything uses the same style. What I do want to talk about next is this is fun. Basically, you could finish the session right there. We can use what is provided and start adding styles and changing it and so forth. But the fun is building your own custom style. You want to come up with a unique look and feel into your application, and so what I want to spend the next several minutes talking about is how do we do that. And so there's a style designer that comes with Delphi to do exactly that. It's the Bitmap Style Designer is the name. It used to be called the VCL Style Designer. Now it's called the Bitmap Style Designer. It's different than the FireMonkey Style Designer that I showed in my sessions yesterday. So if you were there, it's a separate app. However, what gets a little confusing is that if you read any of the XE3 promotion material, they talk about how the same VCL Style Designer can be used to make FireMonkey styles. While technically correct, it's a different style. The FireMonkey controls can use bitmap styles now. That's the new feature that was added into FireMonkey 2. And so in order to create those bitmap styles, you can use the same new version of the Style Designer for VCL. The way it works is you set up images for the different elements that you want to style. And typically you'll use PNG images because they support transparency and alpha channels. So you're going to get much better output when you do that. Likewise, if you're going to want to create this, you're going to want a tool that provides support for doing PNG images and the alpha channels and so forth. Especially if you want to do rounded corners of things, you need to have that. Once we see what we have a set of images we're going to use, we're going to bring them into the Style Designer, and then we need to define the various object settings. So which images are we going to use for the normal push button? What image are we going to use when we push that button down? When the mouse is over the button, it's the hot state. all of the different states of a control that we want to support, we have to associate a various image for. I'm going to show you a shortcut to kind of do a quick version of a custom style, and along the way I'll describe kind of the detailed ways if you really wanted to write it from scratch, what you'd have to do. In addition, do not forget this step. This is a problem that Embarcadero had for the Metropolis styles. You need to define the font and color settings that go along with your custom style imaging, because in addition to just getting the images, and we use the theme engine to do that, and then to display them, controls will query the theme services to figure out what is the appropriate or equivalent color for this particular element. So it's a programmatic access point. For example, we're all familiar with CL button face. Standard color, that's the normal color that Windows is set to. When you apply a VCL style, if the style's been designed correctly, the CL button face color, instead of being light gray, should be getting mapped to the true version that it is in that style. For the aqua graphite, it's actually a very dark gray. It's like 25, 25, 25. I'll show exactly where this needs to be defined, but it is important because if the theme or the style doesn't do it, then the controls that try to do it programmatically won't get the right colors and it won't look right. Save the style, and then we can add that new style to our application. And so we're going to go through the various steps there. So, well, I'm not going to do purple today. I'll do a different color. Go into Delphi and go into the tools and bring up the Bitmap Style Designer. And when it comes up, it's a little temperamental at times. Kind of have to understand how it works. It does load a default style by default. But one of the ways that you can get started is to pick one of the styles that are already defined. So, for example, I can go and do an open, and if you look inside of your documents under RAD Studio version 10 or 9 if you're using XE2, the styles folder has all of the different VCL styles that are in here. And so we can pick one, for example, the aqua graphite. Go ahead and open that, and doesn't really look any different other than the name tells me that it's aqua graphite. And if I go into images, I will see that there's this style PNG. And it's complex. There's a lot going on into this image. So it's one single file that is broken up into the different pieces that are required to do a VCL style. This makes it much easier to actually start with something that's pre-built and then tweak it as you want. It's a little faster way to get started. In addition to having one file with all the images in it, you can also have multiple files, each with its own image if that's the way you wanted to design it. For each image, so we have the image, and then we're going to use that image in all the objects. So this objects node here gives me all of the elements that that a VCL style can be applied to. And it makes sense. It's all mapping to our standard controls. So, for example, the form. So this part of the image is coming from the PNG file. And we can look on the right, it has various properties for it. We can pick which image we want. The button's kind of more fun. When we do the button version, and we open this up, there's a piece for describing the face of the button. And then there's these various bitmaps over here. So the bitmap version, which is essentially your normal version of the button, when I open this up, it actually gives me the style image, the style PNG file. The purple background is just showing that that's transparent. It's nothing important. But notice that there's this bounding rectangle around this version of the sub-image inside of the style. That's what it's picking out from this larger image for that element. If I close this down and go to the disabled version, we'll see that it's actually using the one at the bottom. Make sense? So it's very tedious if you're going to do this from scratch to sign up all the images for it. If it's a single image per element, then you just map the image. You say, this is the image I want to use. You don't have to do the bounding to crop it. So either way will work. Once you've established all this, you can make changes and so forth. So for now, what I want to do is I'm going to make a copy of this and change it. So two things I want to do is I can take this image and export it, and I've already done that. I've saved it off into a directory. We're going to edit that in just a minute. But I'm also going to save the file itself. So I'm going to do a save as, put it in the same spot, and we'll call this the rose style. It's coming up with names. I do too many of these. So now I'm going to save that. It's going to be in the right location. Now at this point, I need to do a couple things. Otherwise, it's not going to work right. Go to the Objects node, not any of the subnodes, but the first node, and it will note that there's the author and then there's the name. We have to change the name for certain because there's already an aqua graphite in there and it won't recognize this one. So I have to change this to the Raise Rose, and then I'm going to change this to Raise Software just because I can. And I'll be complete and update these as well. We're not worried about the Retina display for VCL Styles. It's a FireMonkey thing. So once I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and save this, and we're going to put this to the side. So I'm going to travel over to my image editing software. It's using a very dark theme, which is common, but they give me the option to change it. And I'm going to load up that style PNG image that I had already exported. So this is what it looks like in my editor. Now, I could go in and individually change them and be fancy. I want to be quick. I just want a rose-colored theme that's not available. So I'm going to go into the image, the Adjust and Hue and Colorize. And whoa, look at that. It's like almost already set to rose. It's very dim. It looks nice, bright red on my screen here. But you get the idea. Let me saturate that a little bit more. Does that help? Not really. Ooh, that needs to drop down a little bit. That's a bit bright. Okay, so you can pick and choose, colorize the image the way you want. Do any of the other hues come in better? I guess green's a little bit noticeable. Here, purple. I'll do that one. All right, so we've picked that. Go ahead and make the change to it. I'm going to save that image. So I've saved that off. I can minimize my editor now. And now inside of here, I can do an add. And then I've got to navigate to where I stored that stuff. Conferences, sessions, regular, VCL, styles. There we go. So now I can open this up. This, you can set up a mask and do some other stuff, but since we're not doing anything special, we can just accept it. And now I've got two images in here, and I'm going to delete this one because I don't need it anymore. And I've got my regular style. So now I want to go and check, did the form get what it needed to? Did the button get it? Did I lose it all? Let's see, is it, let's see, it used to work. Hang on. I was excited that the image came in. No, that's not the one I want. Let's get my style back. La, 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 la. Styles. That's the old one. All right, let's see here. I want to update. Do the update instead. Don't do the replace. The reason what happened when you deleted the image, it cleared out all the references to the old style. In the original version for XE2, it actually kept it, but then since they changed it, but the update should now work, so bear with me for a second while I redo the load. Regular, VCL Styles. Click OK. So now I've same image, I've just updated it with the new version of it. Now when I go to my objects, now I've got what I'm expecting to see. It's very subtle, I'm sorry for that, but you do see that it's kind of picking up some rose color. The button's got this background, so everything's where I need it to be. And so at this point, we're not too bad. We should be able to see some effects. So let me save this out and minimize it. I'm going to go into Project Options on my app, and now I'm going to see that because I put a company name, there's a new Raise software entry that gets in the list, and my Raise rows sets up here. So I can select it, and I can even get a preview of what that's going to look like. So I can accept that. I'll change that as the default. Go ahead and run. And I've got my rose-colored UI with my toolbar gap. I have to change that. So if you wanted to colorize, you take one of the ones that's close to what you want, tweak it, and you can get a custom one very quickly. Take that back to 0. So a couple things that with respect to the style, let me go back to the style designer here. So we still have our raise rows style loaded. You may have noticed there's these other elements here. There's a fonts list. So the font list is where we specify mostly just the color of the font that's used. At this point, we're not able to control a lot of the details of the font, like what font face we use and so forth. Hopefully that comes into play eventually, but it's not there yet. Couple things to note, by changing the image, some of the coloring that's used in these fonts has been updated, but others haven't, like this particular entry called Category Panel Group Header Hot and Normal. Category group is the old control panel categories, or the control panel, the component palette also uses this style. So they still have the old blue value in there. Now we can change that, but we're not changing that actually through the fonts version, because the font's color, it's just picking the color of the font, not the background yet. But that's something for us to watch for. So as we go through, is there any other blue items? No, so everything else picked that up except for that. Now if we go into the categories, or the colors I mean, we've got a set of colors here, but I don't see any rows. And the reason for that, this is the list of programmatic equivalent colors coming from the bitmap images that you signed. All the VCL theming engine does is it says, okay, I need the hot state of a button. Give me the bitmap image in it, and I'm going to paint it onto the canvas. Well, what if you need to draw something using that same color? You can get the color through a function. I'll show you that shortly. But where it gets that color is not from the bitmap image, because it doesn't know what pixel in that bitmap image you want to use. We actually, the style designer has to specify that, oh, for the button focused color, it needs to be this. So instead of being this blue color, I need to select and change that to something that's more rose-like. And I'm going to change some of the saturation down. It's kind of reddish. And I would do that for each of the different controls. So I might do the same kind of thing for the hot color, but in this I might want to make it a little bit lighter. And so I can go ahead and we can see the subtle difference between those. If you're going to do this and colorize, you have to go through and update all of these entries to be equivalents in the images you provide. There are controls in the VCL and third parties that will reference these in order to look right. So there's not many, but there's just a few. The generic gradient background end, that actually, if I remember right, is the one that does the category, which is kind of odd when you think there's category entries right there. But if I change this to a red, and then go back to my fonts, they're close. It's red and blue now. It's doing a gradient, so I got to do the other one. And so I got to do the gradient end. So if I pick this one with a darker red color, and now go back to the fonts, you can see, oh, okay, now it's picked up the categories. It's got a red color now. So you have to remember to do that. The system colors does the same thing, but it is where we map our traditional system colors to the theme equivalent or the style equivalent. So, for example, the window version, instead of being white, when it's a dark style, we want it to be almost black. So that's what that color comes from. The window text is not black; it's going to be the light color. This is what was wrong with the Metropolis styles, that these settings in here were not set appropriately. So if you had a control that was referencing CL window text to draw the text, it was coming up black and not white on the dark backgrounds, and nobody could see it. It's easy to fix. Just got to set the color, resave the style, and you're good to go. But it'd be nice if that does get fixed. The scroll bar and color highlight is the highlight selection color. However, I have some things to say about the highlight stuff. You may have picked up on it as I was navigating through. Right now, the highlight color does not change no matter what you do. It's always the system level highlight color. Hopefully that will be resolved and they will provide some way to fix that. Because it doesn't map to whatever the setting is inside the style. It's a different color blue. It comes from the system.
So you will have to do that in Windows itself?
You can. Windows, if you change it in Windows, certain controls will pick that up. Other controls will not. Like the tree view control uses a different, in Windows 7 and Vista uses a different selection display. It doesn't use the selection color. So those won't pick up that color change. Yeah. It's a little awkward. That is exactly what it is, a little awkward. All right, so let me go back to here. So that essentially gets you started how to add a custom style to your app, make the changes, and if you want to get fancy and redesign the images, have at it. It actually is kind of fun to be able to do that. Now, really what I want to emphasize is how some of this works, and when we do see gaps and why things don't work right, what do we need to look for in our own code or third parties. So as I mentioned before, the styles are just an extension of the theme services, which is now just an alias for the new style services. So going forward, we're all supposed to be using style services rather than theme services, which is great if you're only supporting XE2 and later, but if you're having to support earlier versions, it's a little problematic. Which one do you reference? All of this code is in the VCL themes unit, and there's, just like we would do theme support before, you set up an element part. So everything is driven by element. So the element part and type is I want a button and I want its hot state. So once you set that up, you tell the theme engine, theme services, give me the corresponding image and attribute data for it, because there might be a font associated with that particular element and so forth, that we can now display all of that. So to render it, we set up your element and style, define an instance of the element details, the specific coding, and then call getElementDetails with our enum, and then we just do the draw element. If you guys are into component writing, I'd be happy to show you examples of what that does, but for now it's just knowing that this is how the structure is will help us understand the pitfalls. One thing to note if you are doing it is you only want to do the theming if its themes are available. because if in the project options you can say enable application themes, if you turn that off, then the theme engine's not there. I mean, it's there, but there's no resources to link in. So there's nothing to display, so we have to render it in a traditional way for that. So, some gotchas. The toolbar problem is actually a result of what's known as a default brush color. And any of you guys ever work with basic Windows, like straight C code to make a Windows app? This has been a long, long time ago. When you actually had to deal with a real device context and a message loop and so forth. One of the ways Windows works is every window handle that you create, there is a default brush associated with it. It gives it its background. Well, that's white. Has been since 1985. Still is. What happens, though, is we usually don't have to worry about that default brush when we're writing a VCL control, because it's part of the base VCL work to load up into the canvas the right brushes that are used and paint the area. No big deal. The problem is that in that version of putting the border, well, they shifted the painting over by 2, but forgot that the default brush is taking care of the extra stuff, which is why it shows up in this bright white color. And so what has to happen in that case is that, yes, it's offset. I still need to paint that in the theme that's currently selected. And so that's where you can run into problems. If anything comes up in bright white or dark, just black, that's usually it's an indication that something has been missed in the painting routine. So the control probably assumed that the parent was going to paint that, and the parent said, well, no, I don't paint that anymore. So we have to watch it. Owner draw code. If you've done any owner draw list boxes or combo boxes to put icons next to the images and things like that, well, that you've probably set up, you've either filled the rectangle for each item and then you drew on top of that and so forth. Well, you have to look at your code to find out, well, which color are you using to fill that rectangle? If you're using, CL window, you're probably okay, because if the mapping's done right, that CL window, well, I have to qualify that. That is not true. CL window is always CL window. It's always going to be white, what Windows thinks it is. The difference is we have to invoke the mapping. We need to ask the style, what do you think CL window means? So in our owner draw code, we may be using CL window, but we have to then pass that to a function that says, oh, I'm running an active style. It needs to be a charcoal gray, for example. So we have to remember to do that. Selection color, I mentioned that already. The highlight color is not changing. And then there are some issues with, there's some element parts that are missing from the mappings, which can be problematic if you're writing components, but for most part, you guys don't have to worry about that. So there are some helper functions that make it a little bit easier to manage all of this. The first is called SystemStyle, and what this does is it will be true if we are running the Windows style, the regular Vista, Windows 7, XP theme. If that's what's being used, SystemStyle is true. If you're running a VCL style, aqua graphite, golden graphite, all those other ones, that turns out to be false. It's actually very useful to have because your drawing code may be different based on what you want to do. If you are doing a custom VCL style, in order to get the mappings, we're going to call GetStyleColor, GetStyleFontColor, and GetStyleSystem font. That should be SystemColor. Sorry about that, not system font. This, we pass in a color value or a symbol, depending which one we're doing, and it returns back the real color we should be using based on the definition of that style. Makes sense. So GetStyleColor, there's a whole enum called TStyleColor. So if we wanted to get what the combo box disabled color looks like, that's what we would pass in one of those values. Pretty straightforward. The GetStyle font color has a whole lot more. There's a lot more font elements. To be honest, this list should also be on the other side, because you should be able to get to the same font element, the same color values for the foreground and background of each piece, but eventually I hope that they expand that some more. I know that was very tiny. You don't have to read all of it. It's just, there's a lot there. To get the system color, this you actually pass, rather than an enum, you actually pass the system level color. So CL button face goes to Style Services, GetStyleColor. Now this C will have whatever active style is being used, what it thinks button face should be. Now we will use that C color to do all of our drawing in our owner draw list boxes or so forth. Couple other notes. There's a new component message called CMStyleChanged. So whenever we do a set style dynamically, this message gets sent to all of your controls. So if you needed to do something in response to that, then this is your entry point to do that. What would you want to do? You may want to cache the various color settings because you have a complicated display. You don't want to have to keep calculating it and call the helper functions all the time. So whenever you switch to the style, you figure out what colors you really need to have around, save those off into fields, and then now your drawing code doesn't have to keep constantly call the various functions. It's one way to do that. Certain controls are very low level, that they don't automatically pick up the various style support. We need to do some special drawing in order to get them to display correctly. The edit box is actually one of these types of controls, and you can see how they get it to work inside the VCL source code. They do it through what's called a style hook class. So there's a tEdit style hook, and it essentially injects itself just above the control and before the painting code that normally takes place happens. So that instead of drawing the window in the regular way, it actually does it in the style that the VCL style uses. And you can create your own, but you probably won't need to. It's a complicated mess, but just aware that it's there and to be able to handle all of that. Now, going back to supporting older versions of Delphi, this is one of the things that obviously we are very concerned about, because we don't want to have a separate code base just to do all the specialized VCL style support. But the style services are only available in XE2 and later. So in order to handle this, there are a couple things that we could do. You could set up if-defs. So if I'm in XE2 or later, I could do all this code. Otherwise, I do all this other code. Problem with that is that that other code is still valid if I don't have themes available. I don't want to just ignore it. So what I recommend doing, and this is what I've done with our Raised Components product to support all of this, is to create some helper functions for you. Specifically, we have a function called using system style that tells me whether I'm using the system style or not. If I'm in an older version of Delphi, that's always true. I'm always using a system style if I'm in XE. There are no custom VCL styles. The active style color, style font, style system color, they all map to the style services version, but they're standalone procedures, so that if I'm on XE or earlier, it just echoes back the regular color. If it's in XE2 or later, it actually goes to the style services if it's available and does the mapping and then brings it back. Why do I do all of that? Because all of my code uses these functions and it doesn't care what version of Delphi you're on. So that might be very useful if you're running into that issue of trying to manage old and new versions of Delphi. That's all the information I have on VCL styles. I think we've touched on all the different aspects, how to set it up in your app, how to create a custom one, and if you want to fully support it, those are the things that you need to be aware of. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them now.
Are you going to develop color settings?
I haven't done a full-blown custom style where I've tweaked all of them. I've done the colorized versions. I've done a couple modifications for some buttons, but not the full thing, although I do want to. I kind of think it would be kind of cool to just tweak things up a little bit, try it, see what works, and how we can push it, but not yet. So with that, I will let you guys go on to your next session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.